Hey, manufacturing world, this is Wade Anderson with Shop Matters, sponsored by Okuma America. This podcast is created to discuss all things machining and manufacturing. I'm in the studio here in Charlotte, North Carolina, talking with Craig Cottrell. Craig's a 30-year veteran with Morris Group Incorporated. Thanks for coming today, Craig.
Oh, thanks for inviting me, Wade. Happy to be here.
So Craig and I recently took a trip to EMO. Anybody that has not been to the EMO show, this is I would say IMTS on steroids. Would that be a easy way to describe that for anybody that's in manufacturing that's been to IMTS?
It's big. It's probably 2 or 3 times the size.
Yeah. So I've been going to IMTS since 90. I'm going to add it up here. 94 was my first IMTS show.
And well, you must have been like 10 years old then.
Yeah. Felt like it. I think I was 18 or 19, the first one that I went to. So it's funny when you put things into perspective. I look at IMTS as such a massive machine tool show for the United States. And I've only been to 2 EMO shows. How many have you been to, Craig?
I think this was my 7th or 8th one, maybe 6 of them in Hanover, and I've been to Milan a couple of times.
Okay. So I went to EMO in Hanover probably 5 years ago, I guess it's been. My friends with EMEC Machine Tools up in Canada, we went over and spent a couple of days. And at IMTS, usually in 2 to 3 days, I can pretty much cover everything that I went there to see, you know, the things that I really wanted to look at from a bullet point standpoint. EMO, I've noticed, I still haven't been to every building they've got. How many buildings were there this year?
Well, the campus is 25 or 30 buildings, and I would say 2/3 of them were filled with technology. The biggest issue you have is that if you have multiple appointments, if you go with a mission and you lay it out, it can take you half an hour to get from one side of the show to the other. Yeah. And that's riding the buses.
Right.
So I was there 3.5 days, and I wish I was there 4. And I had a schedule of some appointments and some things I wanted to see, and then I wanted to be able to walk the majority of the halls. And 3.5 days just didn't do it. I was exhausted. We were there from the second it opened till the minute it closed, too.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed when I went, I spent a lot of time in the Okuma booth. That was in Hall 27, and then I would take the bus route from Hall 27 up to the front, and like you say, it was a 30-minute wait sometimes, 15, 20 minutes to get on the bus, and then you got a 10 or 15-minute bus trip to go around all the buildings just to get to some of the front buildings where some of the a lot of the third-party aftermarket type vendors and things were. So
it was nice this year, though. It wasn't 90 degrees or pouring rain.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, the weather was beautiful.
The weather was gorgeous.
I live just south of Charlotte here in a little town of York, South Carolina. It was 98 degrees when I left, and get there and it's almost a shock to the system. I think it was in the mid-60s when we got into Hanover there. So talking about going to a show like that, going to Hanover in Germany, you've been several more times than I have, but for people listening that have not been there, let's talk a little bit about just the logistics, getting to the show. Do you find it difficult, easy, hotel accommodations, things of that nature?
No, it's a piece of cake. I mean, it's actually kind of frustrating. I live in the Hartford area, and it's more expensive to fly to Charlotte than it is to fly to Frankfurt.
Isn't that crazy?
It's crazy, and we flew out of JFK, and the flights were easy, and Lufthansa, they had beautiful planes and great service, and I'm stunned at how low the prices were at that time of the year anyway, not in the summer. And getting around Germany's easy, too. Their public transportation is just so much better than it is here. Certainly, it seems like everywhere in the country, not just isolated places. So it was all great. I mean, the accommodations were super, the hotels, the food. You never run into problems with people not speaking English. And if anything, though, they do have special pricing during the show, which is special the wrong way.
Yeah.
The hotels were pretty expensive. But other than that, everything else was great.
We got caught with a little bit of that. We stayed at a Best Western of all places outside of Hanover. We were probably 25 minutes away from where the show was. And some of the service guys that we were there with said that that's usually where they stay when they're doing business there. and the hotel under normal circumstances is like $90 a night. It wasn't a real high-end place by any stretch of the imagination, but we paid right at $300 a night there during the show itself. So they definitely take advantage of the amount of tourists coming in.
Well, I can say you got ripped off because I paid $350, and the Dalai Lama was staying at our hotel there the last time. So I would say the worst thing about mine was my heated floor in the bathroom was not at the exact temperature I'd normally like it. So it was very, very nice.
No, we had a shared communal bathroom at the end of the hall. No, just kidding.
So no, but you asked in general, is going to Germany tough? Absolutely not. The trains are great, the transportation, even at the show, the bus schedule there was great.
So I grew up in the Midwest in Missouri and was a meat and potato eater all my life. So you can probably imagine I love the food every time I go to Germany. That's my kind of food.
7 pounds I put on in that week. Seriously.
I believe it. Oh, goodness. So let's talk a little bit about just the technology in general that you saw at EMO. Mm-hmm. So when I go, I had a handful of items. I go with a plan of who I want to see and meet. And that's one thing I noticed talking to people. You have to plan out your visit to EMO because it's so big and there's so many halls. People that I would talk to would say, I'm here, until 9:30, and then at 10:30 I got to be in hall 2, and then at 10:45 I got to make my way over to hall number 4 because I got a meeting with so and so. So you got to do a lot more pre-planning, I think, for a show that big than maybe you do some of the smaller regional shows or even IMTS for that matter. But I spent most of my time, going from some of the different machine tool builders, but then I try to make it a point to go see all the supply type companies as well. So I noticed kind of that front hall section from 3 through 7, I think was along that front row.
All the way to 9, actually, before it turned and went to the big machine halls.
And you can just almost get lost in a sea of technology. So what was some that really stood out to you that you saw while you were there?
Well, I agree with your comments, by the way. It's hard to get around and you have to make appointments because the other thing is their style of selling there is way different than it is in the U.S. At IMTS, it's not unusual to walk into a booth and feel like you've accomplished something, and maybe you have, true, in a 15-minute stand-up meeting in front of a machine. There's coffee, there's donuts, there's lunches and breakfasts and snacks. And
that's a very good point. IMTS is really a buying and selling show for the most part.
Where it's a relationship builder over there.
Yeah,
and it's much different. All right, it's like trying to show up at your grandmother's house for Easter and leave in 10 minutes. Yeah. It doesn't happen. And there was a number of times we got stuck in booths and we couldn't get out because they just brought the second round of coffee. That's just the way. And they think it's awkward that we don't work that way. There's no such thing as a to-go cup really there. That's an American thing. You want to sit with a coffee in a mug and relax and enjoy it. So from a planning standpoint, that was tough. Mm-hmm. But I think if you asked a question about technology, there was tons of technology, but if I picked a couple, I would say the robotic focus, the automation focus. Let's say automation in general, but robotics especially, is huge.
Yeah.
Saw it everywhere. And inexpensive, small, medium, large, easy to redeploy. It was, and I think it's really, I call it the UR effect, the universal robotics. Mm-hmm. They changed the game on price and simplicity, and now everybody's chasing them. So I saw an unbelievable amount of combinations of UR robots.
Yeah.
And then some of the big boys trying, like the KUKAs and the Fanics and such, trying to catch up.
Yeah. So that's something I think over the last couple of IMTS shows, automation has really been a theme. Mm-hmm. It's grown over the last 2 shows. More and more builders are incorporating different types of robotics into their system. What I noticed at EMO this year in terms of automation, everybody's got it. Every machine tool builder all the way through the show.
Every product they offer.
Had a huge focus on it. But it really, to me, they raised the bar on what they're doing with automation. Some of the things that stood out to me, there was a really neat, it was a Heimer cell. I actually saw 2. One was in another machine tool builder's booth where they had a Fanic collaborative robot on top of an AGV that was going through the cell, changing tools out. And then in the Heimer booth itself, in their own booth, they had a great robotic cell, taking everything from the shrink fit, taking expired tools out, pulling the expired tool out, heating it up, putting the new tool in, presetting it, sending all that data to the control, all through automation. I'm used to seeing machine tools being automated where you're loading parts and unloading parts.
Right.
But I haven't really seen people take it to the level of, okay, where else do we see manpower that we can pull away and automate it? And changing out tools, seeing some of that was a real eye-opener for me.
I think Zoller had a very similar installation in their cell. You mentioned AGVs. I mean, it's AGV is not new. It's been around for decades. But in the applications that we saw at the show, half a dozen or maybe 8, stunning. I still wonder about whether it pays back in a reasonable time period. They're expensive, and but from a flexibility standpoint and from a let's say a future redeployment. So now you don't have to have your machines all lined up, or you don't have to have every piece of technology existing right from the beginning. So saw a ton of that, but certainly the concept of get the people out, and it's not that we're trying to replace people with robots, is there's no people.
Right.
I don't know if you saw in the Wall Street Journal this week, there was an article about the apprenticeship program in Germany. And in the last decade, it's gone from 800 to 900,000 kids. Well, everybody's a kid to me, but in high school students that would normally enter the apprenticeship program, it's below 500,000 now.
Oh, my gosh.
And so, that's not my data. I just read that in the Wall Street, but that just shows, even in a country that's so dedicated to apprenticeship and growing that next generation of people that are going to run all these machine tools, the country that led in it is struggling like we are here.
Right.
So automation now is not get the cost out, get the people out. It's there aren't any people. And then a lot of the people who come in don't know how to run these machines. So you mentioned Heimer or Zoller. That's high technology stuff.
Yeah.
And if you're going to automate it, it's got to be right.
Yeah.
And so the handful of people who do enter this business who are, I think, lucky enough or fortunate enough to make that decision, this is not dirty hands sweating out on the shop floor. There's a little bit of that. But it's really, how do you apply some new technology? Yeah. And I saw that and so let's call all that automating, to acknowledge the fact that there's not enough people.
Yeah.
And so I think that at this show, more than ever, I saw it. I think DMG Mori had 90% of their machines were automated.
Yeah.
Big focus on it. Same, Okuma had a lot, and Doosan had a lot. So all the majors are acknowledging that.
Yeah. Okuma, they had the Armroids debut
that was
this
interesting.
Year. So that's an
integrated
Okuma
robots,
integrated robot inside the work cell. And the key focus there is that you don't need an integrator. So the machine ships with the robot mounted inside of it, and then you configure your inbound and outbound the way that you want it, and eliminate the need for custom integration, which I thought was kind of interesting, a different take on automation. So,
well, it stops the argument about should I buy a Fanuc or an ABB or what color robot.
Right, it's just coming with it. Yep.
Right.
So tell me a little bit more about Zoller. You spent quite a bit of time in the Zoller booth.
I did. It was almost unbelievable. And at the end of the hour, what we saw, because they had automated so many of the steps, even with shrink fitting, and some of the things that tended to be very manually intensive. One of the VPs of sales was there, and I said, "Tell me, where do you have this installed?" And he said, "Right here."
Yeah.
So I think some of it might have been a little future technology as opposed to present day, but it shows where we're going. Half a dozen or a dozen years ago, 5-axis was that. Right. 5-axis is passé now. I mean, everybody's doing it. Everybody's got it. Everybody's got a small, medium, large, an inexpensive one, or an expensive one, a blood and guts 5-axis, and a super high accuracy. I mean, that's old news. Yeah. Everybody had 5-axis. It was there for sure, but it is old news.
Yeah.
So I wasn't offended when he told me that they didn't have a lot in the field, or they only had elements of it out there. But basically what it does is that addresses some of the issues of unattended operation. If your tool's no good and you're fully automated, you're just efficiently making bad parts. So
Yeah.
I was impressed with how they're addressing some of the things you need in a truly unattended operation.
Yeah. I went through Big Kaiser's booth. They had a really nice booth.
Yes, they did.
Spent some time with Jack Burley. He took me around, showed me some of their technology. And one of the things that stood out to me, the communication side of the industry, the IoT or IIoT has been a big buzzword for several years now. And for me, I always struggle wrapping my brain around everybody can monitor everything in the world, but then what do you do with it?
Right.
What do you do with all this information? Well, Big Kaiser had a boring bar, or a boring tool, I should say, that was pretty unique. They would go through and they would cut a bore undersize, probe the bore, feed back the information to the tool. The tool itself would actually adjust. They could adjust in 1 micron increments.
Did they probe the part or
yep.
no?
So they would probe the part,
Mm-hmm.
find the diameter of the hole, and then adjust the boring tool to accommodate, to recut, to put it right on size. And again, you're kind of taking the operator, what used to be in my brain or your brain back when we were running machine tools, and putting it into the communication, the intelligence of the system. And what I thought was really unique about it was they've got software for this tool that can actually learn your cutting process.
Wow.
So if you're
did not see that part, no.
If you're cutting aluminum, for an example, and you need to make a 5 micron adjustment, maybe you make 4 microns, to get it close to size. But if you're cutting Inconel, well, you may need to bump it a little more to actually get it to come out on size. It would learn that over time, and then next time you go into this material and you need to make offsets, it recognizes, oh, you're cutting Inconel, we need to bump it 1 or 2 microns more. So just like you and I would do with tool offsets back in the day, right? You cut it, okay, I'm going to just do a spring pass. I'm just going to clean the bore up, or I'm going to bump it out a little more because I know when I cut I'm going to get a little bit less. So I thought that was pretty unique, and it shows how you're tying in the communication string from the tool, from the measurement and the control system, and making a much more intelligent cutting process. So
I still think that whole Industry 4.0, if that's the correct master way to say it, is we'll see where that all comes. I mean, I learned something new for me this year was that UMATI interface. I knew MT Connect, and then there's the G&L Control has their own OPD or OPC, I think it's called, and so there's a bunch of different formats. But I'd never heard of UMATI, and I guess that's a fairly popular thing in Europe now. But my thing is that you create a monster amount of data, and so what do you do with it? And you need somebody. You can't just give it to anybody. You have to have a purpose for that data. Otherwise, you're just making whoever is your data storage person wealthy.
right.
And the other thing we're seeing too, at least with my customers, I'm with customers a lot. That's my primary focus in my job is they don't want to pay for it. So they believe that information exists there. It's my data. It's in my machine. Why do I have to pay you to extract it or monitor it or massage it? Not unlike a cell phone, where all that data's there and most of the apps are free. I mean, that's what they're viewing. So we're having a heck of a time trying to figure out if there's a way to monetize it or if that's just part of the machine now.
Yeah.
Like the sheet metal almost.
Right. All right. Some of the demos, some of the cutting technologies that I saw there were pretty interesting. There was a lot of focus on gear cutting. Saw a lot of, we in the Okuma booth had a Multis doing skiving and gear cutting, different aspects of it. Something that I saw kind of that stood out in my mind, every time I go, I just talked about the Big Kaiser boring tool, but I always look for what's unique ways of work holding or unique ways of actually processing parts. And I saw some tombstones that use electronic clamping. And something that stood out to me when I look at that, I look at all the technology going into horizontal machining centers. We're still running hydraulics through the pallet or overhead. And I look at this electronic clamping system. That's an opportunity to be able to put work holding or automate a system and eliminate the need for hydraulics. So did you see anything that stood out from like a tooling or work holding standpoint?
I wouldn't even know how to begin that conversation because I was overwhelmed with what I saw, especially in quick change, from majors and from minors and little niche players and such. And I think that, old guys like me, we want to go buy a tombstone and machine it and build all custom fixtures and have hydraulics and just do it the old-fashioned way because that's what we knew. Yeah. I really think that there's going to be the youngsters out there, and they're going to come forward and they're going to design processes around flexible work holding. So when you go to the Shunk booth and the Kurt booth, and I used to think Kurt Weiss is something simple. When you go in there, it's all this quick change. So they're going to be thinking about that from the get-go and designing around utilizing the capability there. I love it, and my head was spinning though. If you gave me a part today and said put this on a horizontal or whatever, a mill, and go get me the best flexible work holding, I'd ask for a year, and then I can maybe get back to you. There's just a lot going on, and that's why I think the young people get into this, grab that new technology, and start thinking about it right from the start. I think the same applies to we saw a lot of additive. I think additive is still a solution chasing a problem that maybe doesn't exist just yet, and I think it's because parts and whole processes aren't designed around it from the get-go. So you keep thinking of taking an old technology and now putting it into an additive. The problem is the additive is so expensive. So it's just the math doesn't work. You don't get a payback.
Right.
But same thing in the work holding. You used to think about making it all custom. Now the question is, how do I take all these Lego pieces and steal a kid's toy thing? But I take the Lego pieces and make it work. Yeah. And then now you can tear it down, reassemble it, and use it for something else without throwing it out. Yeah. Or like you said before, adding all of the accessories like hydraulics and things that you need to do it the traditional way. It's not flexible.
Right. Yep. I think that plays in hand again with the automation discussion. So the more you can standardize things, the gripping points,
be able to reuse it.
Yeah, be able to reuse it, and even just to have commonality from how the robot grabs a part to get it into the machine tool. You've got an operator loading parts in a outside area, or even a robot loading a part in an outside area, but at the pickup point going from the load station into the machine tool, if that's common, then the robot's not changing into arm tooling, things of that nature.
Hey, you mentioned before about the gears. I mean, did you pick up on this transformation of the automobile from internal combustion to electric? That's the
buzz, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, like EMAG had, pretty sure it was EMAG had cutaways of 10 different automotive OEM electric motors and drive systems from Tesla and BMW and Volkswagen, and they had them all. Fascinating how it's technology, but it's way different than we're used to.
Right.
And so most of the stuff that you're going to need outside of the motor is in the drivetrains, and maybe some gearing, but not like it used to be.
Right. And that, from my perspective, that's kind of the question that's dangling out there with a lot of the automotive suppliers is, where are we going? What does the future look like over the next couple of years? And that was a big buzz with a lot of the customers that I talked to over there. If they're in the automotive industry, is where are they shifting to? What are they doing from between now and 5 years down the road? What's that going to look like? And it's changing rapidly. Even the electric motor side of things and the batteries and how they're approaching electronic vehicles is changing as we speak. So that's an interesting topic that I don't know that I'm knowledgeable enough on to go super deep on it, but it's a very interesting time, and there's a lot of change going on in that marketplace, and that's probably the largest sector for machining at the moment. So when you talk about taking away the internal combustion engine, and okay, now where does that move you to if that's what you're tied into? And drivetrain components are getting lighter. They're being machined out of harder to machine materials. You're seeing a lot of the aerospace type materials now in the automotive world, because everything's centered around gas mileage, right? So how do we
get the weight out?
Get the weight out. Yep. So changes perspective on how you machine parts.
Sure. I heard a comment at the show that there's in any given year, you would have half a dozen or a dozen major automotive programs, forward-looking ones, 3, 4, 5 years out, in the engine department, engine, drivetrain, the traditional parts of a car.
Mm-hmm.
There's none. It's all about e-mobility.
Yeah.
And then the other thing they said is that the people who will make those parts will be different than the traditional people who make them now. So there's a lot of first, second, third tier suppliers to the automotive that have been entrenched for decades. And that I had one vendor caution me, said, make sure you're calling on everybody. The next big deal might be somebody that you never heard of, and they're providing an important part of an e-mobility car.
Yeah.
So, for me, again, my kids talk about it, and they said, I'll have an electric car someday. And, my attitude is, I will if you give it to me. I mean, it's not that I'm against it. I just don't. The thought that at 200 and some miles I have to plug in is too limiting to me.
Right.
But my kids, and they're all in their 20s, and they don't feel that way. So I think it's a generational thing.
I agree with that. And how you grew up. I grew up with big horsepower and needing more power, more everything I do. I think the vehicle I've got that gets the best gas mileage gets maybe 8-9 miles to the gallon. I drive lifted Jeeps and things, so yeah, definitely a different trend there. So one thing that I noticed talking to customers there was everybody seemed to be busy, whether they were American customers, European customers. Shops were busy. What was your take? How were you seeing things in the overall business environment?
Well, it was tough. I felt like I needed a beer or something in my hand every time you got into a business discussion, because it would tend to lead to politics. A lot of drama in politics here, in Europe especially right now, and even in China and such. So if you can separate the politics, because there's nothing we can do about it, in general, the business was positive. So I think what I heard was people who were complaining about business had maybe had a 5 or 10% drop from last year, forgetting that we've had one record year after another since about 2010, 2011. So, I mean, we laugh at our place. We got 30-year-olds who don't understand what happened after 9/11 in the business world, or what happened in 2009. And so we've seen 50% drops, 70% drops in business. So when it drops 7%, everybody's panicked.
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of room for that. So the general level of business is good. The customers we call on are busy. Mm-hmm. We're scaring them with politics. We're scaring them with the press. We're scaring them with the trade wars. But the strong will prevail, I think.
Mm-hmm. Any key market that stood out?
The aerospace is still strong,
yeah.
And that's just by the backlog of the planes. And even in aerospace, it's a wonderful story. We need 35,000 planes over the next 20 years, and there's some drama about the 737 MAX, which is the elephant in the room in plane production. They'll fix it. I've flown on the MAX a bunch of times. Happy I didn't know that they were having issues when I was on it. But they'll fix that, and they got to make something. I think there's 15,000 planes in backlog on an A320 and the 737. It's there. So that's going to continue after we get past this grounding. Automotive is going to turn themselves inside out with the e-mobility if it sticks.
Yeah.
We expect power gen to come back, because you got to power all these cars. Mm-hmm. And so that's been very flat. Now, it may not come back in the traditional sense of power plants like where coal plants that's a no-no now, but you're going to have those combined cycle turbines from natural gas, and you're going to have solar and wind and such. So, I mean, there's a lot of exciting stuff coming up, and maybe fortunately, unfortunately, defense mm-hmm. is strong. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of demand, at least with our customer base. We're in 26 states. A lot of demand on the defense side as people ramp up a little bit.
Right. Okay.
So we're encouraged. We think this year's been a bit of a plateau for our company, and we sell 1 out of every 10 CNCs in North America, so we have a pretty big presence here. Mm-hmm. But we see 2020 very strong, and it'll carry into 21.
Excellent. Well, Craig, I appreciate your time coming, spending time with me here today. Again, this is Wade Anderson with Shop Matters. And if you have any comments or questions and topic ideas, please reach out to us. Till next time, thanks.
Thanks, Wade.